mask on. Not that I need to wear one for this talk, but a kind of a segue in. Our local county, Pitkin, said that masks must be worn indoors. So what we're going to do is everybody who comes in has to wear a mask. They know that. But now they have to sit 12 feet away from us. So they're not going to be able to get as close to the altar as they like to. And they're really going to be stuffed into the back of the chapel. And people may not like that because they're used to a more intimate connection with the monks, at least here. But the point that this leads to is you take what you're given. In other words, if you show up, you say, I don't like this, I'm going someplace else. Then you don't take what is given. You search around to get what you want. And that's got nothing to do with cooking, and it's got nothing to do with contemplation, because in both those things, you take what is given. And I think a lot of people don't do either cooking or contemplation because they say, I'm not getting what I want. And so I'm going to do something else. And life is not about getting what you want. It's about relationships and being relational and dealing what's in front of you and not getting crazy about it. A book that I'd like to recommend for those of you who are interested in contemplation is by Beatrice Brutto, and it's called Radical Optimism. We have this book as well as two others by her in our bookstore, and she's very good about the contemplative life, and I think very practical. One of the things I think she talks about is the imagination, for instance. See, that's what a lot of people want to do. They just want to use their imagination. But that doesn't get you in a deep enough relationship with God. That's like imagining somebody is one thing and they're another. And you reach out to be with them, like maybe marrying them, and then finding out later, they're not what I thought they were. They're not what you imagine them to be. Well, God's the same way. You imagine God as something, but that may not be God at all. Or the God of your understanding, if it's your imagination, that's not really going to be much of a relationship. And so, it's the same with cooking. People think they want to become cooks and they imagine what that's like. Imagination is just your imagination. It creates a world that may not at all be real. So continuing on with that, a statement that I'd like to make is don't complain about reality. Don't complain about the real God. And if you were to just read the Psalms, of which there's 150 of them, there's all kinds of images of God presented to people who read them, and they're all based upon the individual or group experience of their divine connection. And so they're all over the place. There's the warrior God, there's the loving, kind, comforting God, there's the punishing God. It's all over the place. But when you get deeper, when you let go of the thoughts and the emotional instability that can be in your life, and just allow yourself to be in stillness and silence, you can begin to open yourself to the true God coming to you. A lot of people think if I pray, I go to God. God is inaccessible in your going, but if you wait, God can come to you if you just get enough of yourself out of the way. And I think that is the contemplative life. And when you look at the going to cook in a kitchen, you walk into the kitchen and your imagination imagines what's going to be there. And it's not. I'll give you an example, for instance, and this is where I think a deeper prayer life helps, because when you get a deeper prayer life, you begin to let go of your first impression, your first energy controlling you. And you're allowed to wait a little. Here's an example. I come into the kitchen and I'm going to do fish and French fries. I know there's fish because I took them out of the freezer the night before. We always have a ton of potatoes. We buy them by the bag. We didn't have any potatoes. And I never thought to look. And one of the monks was going shopping the day before. He said, "Do you need anything?" I said, "Oh, just a head of lettuce." So I could have hit myself over the head and said, "Why didn't you check for potatoes?" Well, because I never checked before for potatoes, because we always have them. But I wasn't going to lose it over them. I just said, I guess, well, I did a little bit. I said, I guess we're not going to have French fried potatoes, at least not homemade. So, but now I've learned from that experience that the next time I'm going to cook something, make sure what I want is there and never assume that it is when it isn't. So don't complain about reality. I think is very important. And another thing that I think we get caught up in is in terms of cooking, and this has to do with resentments, expectations followed by resentments, which I think a more contemplative life deals with. Who cleans up? So I've had the experience where I'm the cook, and isn't someone supposed to clean up? Now, in any community of people, it could be two, that's a community. There's this person who doesn't exist except in our imagination called someone. And it goes like this. Oh, someone will do that. Or doesn't someone do this? And someone really is a euphemism for I'm not going to do it. That's basically what I'm not going to do it. Whereas someone means next person up. In other words, anybody can clean up the kitchen. If you come in and it's dirty, clean it up. But people prefer to say someone will do it. So I have found that someone doesn't always show up after I cook. And I've come into the kitchen and there's been things that just haven't been done right. Food has been put away that hasn't been properly covered, and so on and so forth. I think as you move from these stupid, worthless monks who don't care, or my stupid spouse, or these ridiculous people that I work with, and so on and so forth, you come to where you accept that's who they are. And that's the way they are. You could make a suggestion a time or two, but they'll probably not change because they live in their little bubbles. They live in their little world. They don't want to be disturbed from it. So be careful of someone, especially in your own head, in your imagination. Someone will take care of this. Maybe not. So when you come to cook, if you're cooking for other people, don't assume that they're all going to clean up the way you want. They'll clean up some, but they may not clean up the way you want. Again, reality. And because what good is cooking? And then an hour later, if something didn't turn out right in the cleanup or the putting away, you get all upset. You're not going to grow spiritually, and you're not going to enjoy cooking because you're always frightened about the mess that'll be left. Or you'll get into I don't care either, which is certainly not a way to live the contemplative life. Now, reality also has to do with how does the food taste. You can maybe control a little bit of how it tastes. I think you can control a lot about how it tastes, but you can't control compliments. Compliments are optional, much more optional. So when you're cooking for other people and they don't say anything, and you really worked hard to do something from scratch as opposed to from a box or a can or a bottle, and they don't say anything, the thought again is these are worthless human beings, when in fact, that's who they are. That's the way they are. Why are you cooking? Why are you meditating? What is the purpose? And if the purpose isn't for you to be changed, then it's just not going to work. It's you that gets changed, not God. In meditation, most people, when they're taught to pray, is to change God by asking for things, petitioning God for stuff. You want to change God's mind by your activity, your energy, your prayers. But a deeper meditation is to change you, not God. God's fine. It's us that need to be worked on. So you've got to be cooking so that you become transformed yourself. You become the food of God, if you will, and God is preparing you for what? For a deeper relationship, eternal life. So naturally, things are not going to be as you expected when you walk in. Life isn't as you expected. Uh, it is what it is. And so I have to let go of wanting compliments and stop and ask myself, why did you do this in the first place? And if it, I would want to feed people. And so I'm of service. I'm getting out of myself, but I've also got to get out of my ego. So a monastery, like any community, is imperfect. It's only in your imagination that the monastery is this perfect place. It's not. It's people. We're trying to live a certain way according to the Benedictine rule, but that's an ongoing experience. But it's imperfect people being challenged to be stretched by the rule of Saint Benedict. So the monastery doesn't exist according to my wants. It simply exists. It is. And I see how I fit in, and cooking is one of the ways that I fit in. And maybe by my presence, something might be changed, but it will be God through me, not through me, period. That's just my ego out of control. So I've got to stop looking for the splinter in the eye of someone else, as Jesus would say, and look at the log in my own eye. In other words, learn a lot about yourself from cooking, just as you're going to learn a lot about yourself from sitting in silence and stillness and meditating a couple of times a day. And it just takes time. It's perseverance, but you will learn things about yourself, because I believe that when God realizes how serious you are in this effort, God will begin to show you things about yourself. A lot of people read about the contemplative life and say, oh, this sounds so good. I can't wait to feel good. Well, they must have skipped the chapter on not feeling so good, in which God reveals yourself to yourself, your shortcomings. It's called The Unloading of the Unconscious by Thomas Keating, but you call it whatever you want. Suddenly you'll have inspirational reality will come. Oh, Terry, you really are this. Didn't you ever notice that? And the reason you're this is because of that. And you make connections, and you don't have to kill yourself over it. You're just realizing it. And now you can work on letting it not control you by the power of this relationship that you have with the divine presence, which I call God. So I don't have control of the monastery, and I don't have control of the kitchen contents. So stuff gets eaten. I think I mentioned this last week. I was going to do something with oranges. I ordered oranges. Shopping's on Monday. By Friday, there was one orange. Why? Because people saw oranges and they wanted them. I never thought that I'd say oranges and no one would touch them. So I've learned that I've got to put things in little bags with food for so-and-so day main meal, so people don't touch it and eat it. Stuff like that. That's about as much control as you have, but I'm not the shopper. And another thing, I went into the kitchen, and scissors is very important, because a lot of things only seem to open with scissors. These things that are child-proof, they're cook-proof too. And the scissors were gone. I can't function. Okay, that's your first thought. But from a contemplative life, you've learned to not let the power of that first thought set you off or control your response. So, oh, okay, somebody has it. It will show up in time. And it was there within half a day. But it's those kinds of things. So I try to walk into the kitchen and bless myself first and say, thank you, God, for this opportunity to be of service. May things turn out well according to your will, not my will. Uh, so another thing in terms of reality is grocery food is what it is. Nature does not always produce the best. Stuff happens, there's drought, there's too much rain, uh, uh, a frost that's not supposed to come at a certain time. Nature doesn't always produce the best because of circumstances that interfere. Or food was improperly stored, or it was run out of on the shelf life. Shelf life. You look at something, you realize we should eat this 3 months ago, and improperly stored. I don't always control that. I remember when my parents first moved to Florida in the late 80s, the produce sections of the supermarkets down there were terrible because it was very hard to get fresh anything except grapefruits and oranges, which grew in the town at the time. And you went and bought those at the farms. Why was that? Why couldn't they get fresh produce in Florida where it's hot? Because they hadn't developed the trucks, the distribution things on wheels that could preserve food long enough to get from where it was grown, packaged, and delivered. Over the years, they developed the refrigeration and so on and so forth, traveling refrigeration, and the produce turned out to be a lot better. So my mother was very disappointed because, of course, she had grown up and knew the Northeast, which, of course, just knows what to do uh, and doesn't have the hot weather of Florida. So grocery food is what it is, and you can order half a dozen avocados, and you get what comes. And the shopper will say, "This was the best of the avocados that they had, so I bought what they had." And I realized, okay, we'll do what we can with what we got. And I think when you're meditating, it's the same thing. You've read your book, and it sounds really good, but then you show up and you're in whatever space you're in whatever mood you're in all these things, and you expect to have it be just like the book, and it isn't. And so you have to accept that that day, that's the way it is in your meditation. It's just your mind's filled with things. You've got something you're focused on that you just can't get let go of, or something that you should not let go of. That maybe it's the wrong time to be meditating, whatever. But the thing is, you persevere. You do it again. If you're doing it twice a day, you do it a second time later on, your usual time. Those kinds of things. I think that's why people like to sit and meditate in the same place, because it gives them some sense of control, and it gives them some sense of familiarity. So they don't have one more thing they got to get used to, which is a chair they never sit in, or a place that they never go to, or something like that. So at least I'm cooking in the same kitchen. Uh, and there are certain trends that take place, but you never know. So this is just more reality that food is what it is. You do the best that you can. Uh, you befriend the shopper, that's for sure, because they have little control. You put something on a list, they can only buy what's there, and I can only show up to meditation, and God's going to do what God's going to do. It's not that God's imperfect. It's that this is the way it's going to be today, and there's probably a good reason for it. Maybe God is working on something in us that needs to be adjusted or changed or whatever. We only have our hopes, but we have to trust that God is at work in us, and it's going to be all right. And so if you can't have one, so we couldn't have potatoes. So I decided, okay, I got jasmine rice. Let's do jasmine rice. Now, one of my shortcomings is rice cookers. I have never had it turn out correctly in rice cookers. Somebody told me how much water versus how much rice. That didn't work. So I asked another person, gave me another combination, but I just decided the bag said heat some water, throw the darn thing in there, wait till it boils, turn it down to low. When all the 20 minutes, when water's evaporated, you got rice. Sure enough, we had jasmine rice. And so, but when it didn't work in the rice cooker, did I say I'll never make rice again? Well, yes, I did. But then I decided that was not a good idea. That's like saying, that's like me saying, why don't you try meditation? And you do it once or twice, and it doesn't seem to work, whatever you think work is, how it's supposed to work. I'm not going to do that anymore. Um, you're not going to get very far in life if one or two times things don't work out. There is an alternative often. So now I just do rice that way, and it's fine. Um, you do what you do. And so that brings you into acceptance. I try each day to say, I'm going to sit here. Yesterday morning, I sat after vigils in the morning. I sat in quiet and stillness. Oh, it was like rockets going off. I felt I'm going to be canonized a saint. I got it. And then that afternoon, I'm all crazy. And you have to have acceptance. You never know what it's going to be. But, if you don't persevere and show up, it's not going to get you anywhere. So acceptance is important. So I think in cooking, cook without whining. You accept that things are a certain way. I did find a fully cooked baked potato in the refrigerator, in the in the aluminum or tinfoil, as my grandmother used to call it. So I found it. Old people know that. I found it wrapped in tinfoil. Took off the tinfoil, and I said, "Can I make French fries out of a fully baked potato?" So I went through the process, peeling, blah blah blah, and I did make French fries, and they looked like French fries. They tasted like, I don't know, terrible. But I tried something. That's why I made the jasmine rice as backup. I tried something. I didn't know if it would work or not, and it didn't. It didn't work out. You don't do that, and that's okay. It's not the end of the world. You learn by trying, and go on to the next thing. So I try to cook without whining and just say to myself, "This is an experiment. Let's see how it works out." And someone says, "Oh, these potatoes don't taste too good." You may, instead of throwing the bowl at them, you say, "Well, it's an experiment. It didn't work. That's the way it is. You don't have to eat it." That's the other thing. They don't have to eat it. So don't eat with whining and don't cook with whining. But remember, still, if your prayer just seems like a complete mess that you're sitting in, you're in sacred space. That's the leap of faith, not a belief in the God that is. Not your belief in God is simply your belief in God, which could be filled with your imagination and whatever. But the reality is how your meditation worked out. You know how that appeared to you from your feelings or whatever. But what you have to remind yourself is every time you meditate, you're in sacred space. You don't have to feel it. It doesn't have to seem like it. The chair is uncomfortable. It's sacred space because you have showed up to be in a relationship with the divine who created you in God's image and likeness, by the way, didn't make you a potato. So you're in sacred space every time you meditate. And when I go into the kitchen, I have to remind myself, this is sacred space. This is where you're preparing food to nourish, even if it's nourishing yourself, you're sacred, you're worth it. You're worth cooking for just you. I shouldn't say just you, for you. You're never just you. You're to say you're just you is like you're nothing unless you have somebody else with you. No, you're you. You're worth a good meal. And you're worth the leftovers from a good meal the next day. So it's always sacred space when I walk into the kitchen. And it's very hard to curse and swear and condemn people in sacred space. You wouldn't do it in church. So why am I doing it in the kitchen? Uh, so whatever my ideas are about the kitchen or about meditation, they're both sacred space. They're both a place where you're of service. When I'm meditating, I'm of service to God in relationship. God wants me. Now, in my tradition, which is the Roman Catholic one, I believe that my Lord and Savior died on the cross and he's divine, that God came on the earth, took on human nature, and lived at a time when there was no indoor plumbing and didn't have an automobile. And at one point said, I have no place to lay my head. I mean, God loves us enough to do that and then to let go of God's life if to show us how silly we can be about the divine. So you're of service when you show up to God because God hungers for you in your completeness, which means God hungers for you in all your not so good stuff. That's part of your completeness. God loves you as you are and will work on you. Uh, and you'll become delicious for God. And the kitchen is a place of service. So whenever you're of service, you are really in a bit of a sacred space. So we tend to want to meditate in the same spaces because these are our sacred spaces, and it gives us a sense of control uh, because we think we can control the experience if we're in the same space. And I think it's important to let go of control. And so this monastery is a rather big building relative to anybody's home. And I try to give myself permission to try different things. Sometimes, why don't I just sit down in this space and do something that I was going to do that I usually do in my room? Uh, Prepare a talk or go over some notes or read something, whatever. So I try not to control my environment when I'm at prayer because I can't always control my environment. As it's cooling off here, for instance, up here in the mountains, we're supposed to get some sub freezing temps early in the morning within the next week or so. But we don't turn on the heat yet, or the Abbot doesn't turn on the heat till sometime in October. So it gets a little chilly late September, early October inside the building, but you never quite know because the sun can warm it up a little. All I know is I'm going to go here and pray. I can't control the temperature. That really does prepare you because when you sit, you can't control God either. You can make adjustments, wear a beanie or bring an extra jacket or a prayer robe or something. But ultimately, you don't control the environment. And so you don't control the kitchen. Uh, Kitchens change somewhat. And stuff is missing and so on and so forth because it's a communal kitchen. It's not my kitchen. All these monks use the kitchen, and generally, when someone else does the dishes, they tend to put things somewhere. And to me, I know where things ought to be, and so I go looking for something where it ought to be, and it ain't there. And you're opening cabinets and drawers and looking all over the place to find something. And eventually you'll stumble on it because they didn't take it to their bedroom, except maybe the scissors. So I only know where things are supposed to be according to kitchen etiquette of the cooks. But not everybody cooks. They didn't take it out of that cabinet. They don't know where it goes, so they just stuff it someplace. And eventually it shows up. So it's just another opportunity to let life happen and to let go of your expectations. especially in a communal place like the kitchen. If you are living alone, you have a lot more control. You have a lot more control over your meditation space too. But I don't live alone, so I have to deal with that. So now you're in the kitchen, not only acceptance, but why not explore a little? Oh, the ego doesn't like exploring because it wants certainty. It wants to, and the certainty is going to be success. And the ego does not care to explore. So you got to just let go of that ego. And in a deep prayer, you're letting go of your desire for the results. Okay, you have a desire for results, but you let that go because you know God is at work. God is cooking you, if you will, for not cooking as in hell, but cooking you as in to make you divine food, if you will. So explore, find out, try stuff, such as I did with the baked potato, or I flavor foods now with various different things that I've discovered from one or two of the other cooks. You learn somewhat by reading, but even when you read, you've got to do it yourself. You've got to try, and then after a while, you read fewer recipes. As I said last week, recipes are kind of a sense of certainty. If I do this, I'll get that. But with cooking, you want to be exploring, open, expanding yourself, if you will, because that's also why am I expanding myself? Because you're letting go of that darn ego, which wants total control of everything. And that's not a good thing. So when you're exploring, finding out, trying stuff, you have to let go of great results, whatever that is. Don't aim for great results. You're not going to poison anybody. Um, what you're really working on when you're doing that kind of exploring, trying stuff, is you're dealing with fear and ego. Boy, is that an important thing in the contemplative life or all spiritual life. Fear and ego. Fear and ego. Neither of them want to explore or try anything. That's why people tend to stay in their little bubbles. They don't want to try things. It's not just they're lazy and worthless, which, of course, in my lesser moments, I will judge them that way. Then, usually in prayer or reading, God will remind me how judgmental I am. And my prayer is not to change them, make them worthless to worthwhile, which would be just an ego thing for me. It's to get me changed. That's what the prayer is about. And that's what the cooking is about. So letting go of fear and ego and explore. You see something, you say, "Ooh, I wonder what this is." Well, why don't you open it up and smell it? Or maybe put a little bit of it on your tongue. Oh. Or that's good, but it doesn't go with this food. Or I don't want it to go with this food. So you keep that in your memory bank for some other time. Uh, so you because of food, because of fear and ego, some people prefer the known, something they know and are sure of. So they tend to go towards processed foods. It's easier, it's more predictable. Now, there may be some good reasons for processed food at times. Uh, you got a very busy life, and you're also trying to prepare a meal for a family. Uh, just so that you know um, why you're doing that and the benefits of it, uh, so that when you do get the opportunity to actually take time out to cook, and I think that's one of the graces that I have here, is when the cook's cooking, uh, cook has to put aside doing other things. They're not going to get those other things done because they're focusing on cooking. It's much harder if you are expected to be the cook, the shopper, and you're working a job, which was what my mom was doing for some time in the latter part of her life. And that was tough. And I wasn't very helpful. because I was selfish and self-centered, and I was afraid to cook, and so on and so forth. But fortunately, I got out of that. Um, I think I got out of that. So we do tend to like to go to processed foods because they're easy and they're predictable. And I think there's sometimes when you don't have that busy job and you do have the time and you still go to processed because it's easy and predictable. I'm suggesting that cooking a few things from, let's say, scratch, okay, from the real thing. That is, I made French fries from real potatoes. I didn't buy a bag of frozen French fries. Well, I did, and I tried it, and they taste terrible. So um, the thing is that you try new things, and you see how it works, and you discover, and you feel, I think, pretty good about yourself. I feel pretty good about myself when I have a wonderful meditation. I feel pretty good about myself when the meal turns out to be really good. Um, so keep those in mind while you're doing what you're doing. And if you have the time, then you're worth it to cook from the real thing. So something like when we're cooking, it's another example. I think what's going on in in our world now with COVID. I hear a lot of people say, "I want to get back to the way things used to be," and I say, "Wait a second, you were awfully busy. If I wanted to get together with you, sometimes it took 6 weeks. You want to get back to that?" Well, no, I want to get back to that, but they have no plan of how they're going to change their life post COVID. So they are going to drift back to the way things were. And we do that with because it's the known. Well, we don't like the way things are now. And in our imaginations, which I start out with, we think that when we get back to the way it used to be, things will be so much better. No, they'll be different. But if you were scattered and crazed and overstressed before COVID, the same's going to go on because you haven't come up with a plan. So we do it with cooking, and we tend to do it with our prayer. We can go through a time when it's really, really good. What's that? I feel good about my prayer. And then it's not, I want to get back to the way it was. But the way it is now, when it's not so good as it used to be, in prayer is part of the process of your growing. You read about this time and time again in all these books. I mean, Radical Optimism by Beatrice Brutto is you're optimistic, not because things are going well, but things aren't going well. That's what makes it radical. You're optimistic that they're going to get better in the change because God's working on you, not to destroy you, but to make you all that you're supposed to be. That is, our job, as Thomas Merton said, is to become ourselves, become the best me that God made, not to become you. Or as somebody said, if you're an apple, you're an apple. Stop trying to be an orange. Just be the best apple you can be. So I think that I'm not looking to return to the past. I'm looking to move on through COVID as part of the what's my given to the better me in the process of my meditation, my living with other people, and the things that I do, such as cooking. So don't try to cook in a way, this was really good last time. I'm going to do this over again. Exactly the same way. That's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a great idea. But just give yourself permission to experiment, try something. And then when the person eating it says, this isn't like it used to be, I don't like this, why don't you make it like it used to be? Okay, so just take it as a piece of information, something you can use for the next time you cook. Don't come back with a rejoinder such as, why don't you be like you used to be? Why don't you be the person I married? The jerk you are now. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad I'm single. But oh, that's a different story. And that's a different workshop. Any case, uh, be open to a change. Prayer time has has seasons, and so do foods. In other words, there's a season for peaches, and so when they're in season, enjoy them, but don't expect them when they're out of season to be just as good. Well, prayer has seasons, and you can be in a season of, in terms of your transformation, it's not a weather issue like winter, spring, but in terms of your transformation, there's seasons for feeling good because God's allowing that, and seasons for not feeling so good. But not feeling so good in the prayer is moving you to growth. Any relationship has its ups and downs. Uh, and because it's helping us to grow. We're in this meditation thing for better or for worse, not for me feeling good all the time. So the kitchen is sacred space. You don't create it, you walk into it. That should be just a little bit humbling. You don't create sacred space, you walk into it and you cooperate with it to make something happen. Now, in a home that you own or have some control of the kitchen, you can redesign it for a center stove in the center or counter space in the center or where the cabinets are. So you do get some control, but I don't have that here. I have the kitchen that's given. And when I go on holiday with my sister, which I hope to do in October in Sea Ranch, California, from which I will be giving a talk, we try to rent a home each year we do this, and hopefully COVID allows it this year, didn't last year. We look at what's the kitchen like, and often the people who are advertising the house for rent will speak about the kitchen because they know that some people like to cook, and they'll talk about what they have. And we've gone into places, we've gone into kitchens, and we've had to go to the store and buy something, a pan. I can't believe they don't have a muffin pan. What, these people are primitives because we want to make muffins. Any case, yeah, it's sacred space, all right? And you don't create it, it just is. So I try to remember whatever house I'm renting, when I walk into the kitchen, it's sacred space. And you do what you can with what you got. At least we buy our own food. So being with God is sacred space. It's not about doing what I want in prayer. It's allowing God to do what God wants, which is why the more contemplative prayer is one of waiting and letting go of my agenda, if you will, and just trust that God is at work. Uh, and sacred doesn't have to have performance standards. The kitchen doesn't have to be one thing or another. I mean, it has to have certain things that work, stoves and ovens and water and so on like that. Yes. But I try to remember what I have is still sacred. I can still cook. And so staying with that whole idea of sacred space, think of it in terms of mystery. You don't compare and contrast mystery. You don't evaluate mystery. It just is. And don't we evaluate God by what God produces, what we get that we assume came from our efforts and therefore God's response. So God's a mystery. My gosh, God's a mystery. Let God show up as God chooses. It doesn't mean mystery as in to be solved. It just means depth, never to be completely understood. And at some point, some mystics will say God is incomprehensible, inscrutable, but God can be loved. And so don't evaluate God and don't compare and contrast. And so remember that food that is grown is part of God's creation. And so food has the very presence of God. Um, Keep that in mind when you're handling it. You say, "Oh, this is rotten. It can't be. It couldn't have come from God." Well, aren't you once in a while rotten? And you came from God, and God loves you, even if you're a little rotten. He says, "I'm not rotten." Well, why don't you just continue to meditate and let go of your thoughts and your desires and your words. Maybe God will reveal some of your dark side. Uh, so, food is God's creation. You want to call it rotten? Well, maybe it is. It's past due. Okay, but it had a it was it still got a sacredness to it. And if I can look at that and say I can't use this food, it's worthless. Well, I it sometimes I look at it and I think, oh Terry, think about yourself. Have you always been so worthwhile? Now God loves me in my incompleteness and imperfection, but I have at times been not very useful. As a matter of fact, as one boss told me one day, you're unemployable. And but that didn't mean nobody cared. So even food that's can't be used anymore, that's way past its due, it, let it reflect something to you. Let it teach you something about yourself. And therefore, it wasn't useless. No, you can't cook with it, but it reveals something about yourself. We are all part of God's creation. And we can, if our lives lack a lot of spirituality or hardly any spiritual efforts, we can turn out to be kind of rotten people too. So, but that doesn't mean we're unlovable. So, and mystery is always in the now. When I walk into the kitchen, it's not yesterday's kitchen and it's not the tomorrow's kitchen. It's not the way it might be if I redesigned it. It's the way it is now. And it's going to reveal something of myself to me as I enter into the experience of cooking in this kitchen. And that is part of the mystery. You learn about yourself from efforts of service to others. Uh, you notice how much less upset you get when you're just cooking for yourself, and then if you were cooking for several other people. Um, Being of service is not just about helping others, it's about transforming you. People know this in all these 12-step programs. They're told to be of service. And that is be useful to others so that you'll be changed. You have no control over whether they'll be changed. That's not why you're of service. I mean, why would you go bring food to a Skid Row alcoholic who is going to continue to be a Skid Row alcoholic who gets a meal for the moment? Because maybe you'll be changed. You can hope that this will do something, maybe a good example. But you do these things to be changed. The cook is the mystery that needs to be plumbed. Oh, not plumbed as in plumb, but needs to, you have to enter into your depths to discover the mystery of God, which is so much part and parcel of yourself. So there are times when you are ripe in your contemplative prayer and times when you're not. And it just goes with the way it is. And so I drop all expectations when I pray, or I try to. All expectations. My job is to show up. And so when I show up to cook, I have wants and desires and hopes, but expectations, I don't know. I mean, you say, well, if you just do this way, yes, probably, but not necessarily. So it's all in the now. Whereas evaluation is about the past and the future. And when we cook, we're encouraged to cook as we pray in the now moment. This is what I'm doing now, and to try to stay with that. Now, I think as you cook over time, you'll be aware of other things, the peripheries, like something's boiling, you got to be in touch with it. But you learn to stay in the moment so that what you're doing, you're focused enough on while still being aware of something boiling. Otherwise, you'll be aware of the boiling, forget what you're doing, and chop your finger off, which is not a good thing. Nobody wants to eat your blood or your finger. Uh, so don't sit around evaluating as you're going about. Evaluating. What is evaluation? It's comparing and contrasting. It's comparing to your imagination about the future, how it's supposed to be, and or the past, how it was. And so you're making all kinds of judgments, but you can only live in the present moment, and you can only do what you do in the now. How it turns out will be maybe somewhat of a surprise. But if you're open to exploring and learning, you'll say, "Oh, that was a surprise." Most of the time, things will work pretty well. So I judge food. I tend to judge food also, talking about past and future, by its outsides, by how it appears to me. What a great reminder of how I am with other people. This is one of the things that'll come from a cook who is having a contemplative life. You say, okay, I just sat in my prayer this morning. But what happened is you sort of opened up the channels of your deepest innards so that something can come and inspire you in thought and feeling later in the day. And so I realized once in my cooking, as I looked at something on the outside and said, "Oh, this is no good," I opened it up. It was delightful, but I had to make the effort at opening it up, chopping, peeling, whatever, and it turned out to be much better than it looked. And I said, "You know, Terry, you tend to judge people the same way. How do they look? What is their outside appearance?" And I think it's in the scriptures. You'll sit next to somebody who's looking good, and you'll avoid somebody who's looking bad. The derelict on the street. You don't want to spend too much time with him or her. They don't look right. So I think, well, and there are certain people to be avoided, and certain indications they give from the outside, but it's not to judge them. It's for self-protection. Because we really, unless you're walking in the footsteps of another, how can you know all about them? So I think we got to do the same with food. And just you look at it, so this isn't going to be very good. Or something is advertised, and so you buy it and you look into it, open it up, unpack it, and it's not what you thought it was, but it is what it is. And maybe it's still going to be useful. I bought something that I thought said seedless watermelon. I said, "Oh my gosh." They finally came up with something, seedless watermelon. Well, when I opened it up, it had plenty of seeds. I had to look more closely at the label. I think it says almost seedless. Well, it was hardly almost. It had a lot of seeds. Uh, but it tasted good once you got rid of the seeds. So you so much we learn about ourselves from cooking, I think. So I try not to evaluate food on the outsides. I try not to evaluate what I'm doing based upon comparing it with something that happened in the past or my expectations of how it'll be in the future. Now, so all this mystery, entering into the mystery of letting foods reveal themselves to you, either just as they are or with an added ingredient. Allow it to say hello and show you something that you didn't eat. Oh, wow, that's really good. Or somebody says, here's a food that I know nothing about. I've heard of it. I don't even know what it is. And I said, what do you do with it? And somebody might say, well, you do this or whatever, and you try it. And wow. So that's a mystery. I mean, you begin to pray because people talk about it, either in a book or to you from their own experience, and you decide to pick up on it, to try it. That's meditation groups that get together, like a centering prayer group, that pray together, and they share their experience. with one another, and you pick up something from their experience that wasn't yours, and you try something, and you see how it goes. So I think that's all part of growing spiritually as well as cooking. So recipes, on the other hand, are not mysteries. That's how I started out, recipes. Because I knew nothing about nothing. So you need recipes in the beginning. You're not exploring and trying new things. Everything's new. So you might as well at least do what it says on the package or what somebody tells you. And then eventually you try some things. So recipes are not mysteries. They're givens. And they're somewhat predictable. So what we're invited to do in contemplative prayer is enter into the mystery. You know, when you do a novena or a pious prayer that's in a book or you've done before, you kind of have the sense of the results of how you're going to feel about it. Contemplation is not like that. It's different every day because God's dynamic. Your novena is not dynamic. It is. It's a given. It's got words, same words every day. So, I mean, you can be changed and grow, but it's a sense of, it's like a recipe. Uh, it's given to you. Just do what it says. Follow the instructions. But in mystery, in prayer as well as cooking, you drop the predictable life. You drop its safety and its security. And a lot of people don't want to enter into deep meditation because they don't have a sense of security and safety and the predictability of it. And that's what they want from religion, certainty. Well, last I looked, a lot of it's supposed to be about faith and relationship. You get into a relationship with another person and you want certainty, it's not going to happen. Or if you join a group and you want certainty, if it's a dynamic group, a dynamic person, things change. Recipes say that things are fixed and settled. I'm not a recipe, and neither are you. You're not fixed and settled. You're always growing, whether you like it or not. You are always growing. And speaking of always growing, you might ask yourself, is God fixed? Well, that's why we do our novenas. We want fixed. We want certainty. God's not fixed. So I keep that all in mind. Now, look what happened. We've been going for an hour. Those of you who are still here, 17. So we're going to have to take just a little bit of break in a moment here. And there's a, if you know how to do chat, you can turn that on and see what the messages are. But there's a way to support me in my work because I do have bills. Keep me solvent is through sending checks here to the monastery. We'll put that address up. Or if you have Venmo, my account, which will put that up, are two ways that you can support me. But what we'll do now is we're going to take a little break. And I may go downstairs and turn on the oven now because we got some pizza we got to do later. But in any case, we'll take this break and we'll come back in 10 minutes. All right. Which will say 10:10 to be nice and even, or 10:10 on my computer on Mountain Time. And we'll see if we have some questions. And then I'll do a little bit more. And then we'll talk about the next time. Okay.
We'll be back in 10 minutes. 10:10.
Okay, well, it's 10:10 on my computer, so hopefully we're back. Oh, almost everybody came back. Only lost one. Okay, well, this will be recorded, is being recorded, and so all you need to do to find it on YouTube is go to snowmassbookstore.com, and it'll say, be listed there. Hit this button, it'll take you right to the spot in YouTube. You don't have to go through YouTube trying to figure out where I am. And as you're thinking of questions, I will bring up the imagination again. We can use the imagination to escape or to put us in hell. An escape would be fantasies. To use the imagination for fantasies to escape my reality, whatever I think that is. And I think in deep meditation, the really real will be revealed to you. And we can also use our imagination to live in the hell of our own fears. Things are terrible, and my imagination makes them terrible or worse than the worst possible outcome is going to happen. And the imagination is so powerful that it will overcome the will. And I see this in prayer. I sit down and say, my will is to sit here in God's presence and not pay attention to my thoughts, and certainly not to be talking, just sit in quiet and stillness. And my imagination just jumps in there and takes over. And all of a sudden, I'm in this scenario of fear or fantasy, or reliving some past event as my imagination conjures it up, or some future event as my imagination conjures it up. And I constantly have to go back to my weak will, saying, why am I here? Oh, and so I often return to my breath. Some people use a sacred word to remind themselves, why am I sitting here? Certainly not to imagine things. But the imagination can be very, very good if it helps us to see the possibilities of something that we're doing or about to do. In that sense, I'm going to cook something, and I'm letting my imagination help me to see how to put it together, how to be creative. And that's where the imagination can be very helpful. Not saying it has to be like it was or it will be like this, but in the sense of exploration and let the imagination take you. And I think God, if we will take our imagination, because we were given an imagination. It's part of our human makeup. So it's part of and parcel of God's revelation of God's self. It's just a matter of how we use it for the best possible outcomes. So we use it to give us the sense of, if we're going to explore or try, we get an idea and inspiration, and we imagine how it might be. If we do this, maybe this will be. What are the possibilities, and so on and so forth, as opposed to it has to be this way, or this can't possibly work. So let God work with your imagination. If you're not into your fears or your fantasies, God's got a chance to work on you. So let's see if there's any questions. So you can either put them in chat or just unmute yourself, as we say now in these sessions, and just speak up. Okay, I'll go on with a couple of other things. And in cooking, I'm not just working on food, I'm working on Terry Ryan. So I'm really working on myself. And I try to keep that in mind. I'm working on me as best as I can. I'm working on my attitudes about things. Am I getting upset? Am I getting resentful? Am I at peace? And I think the deeper my contemplative life, the more likely I'm going to be at peace. Although maybe not all the time. Maybe God wants to show me some shortcoming in myself by some upsetness about something that I don't need to be upset about. But it'll all be a learning experience. So I'm learning not just about foods, I'm learning about Terry Ryan. So I'm working on myself, and I've noticed some of the changes that have taken place. I'm doing things a little bit more peacefully, with a little bit more love of others without any expectations of them. So my attitude is beginning to change. My sense of presence in the kitchen is beginning to change. I mean, it was pretty frightening, uh, early on when I thought I'm really going to make a meal, and that sort of thing. It wasn't like baking, um, because in baking, when I first started to bake bread, I had the monk who used to bake bread, but he's retired from bread baking, show me how he did it. But with bread, so bread is not home baked bread wasn't essential, if you will. We have a shopper who goes and buys bread at the store. It's nice and they'll enjoy it. But if it turned out no good and I threw it all away, what would they know? Or if I served it and they didn't like it, they just wouldn't eat it. But a meal, they're expecting a meal at a certain time on that day. And that's my responsibility. It's not optional. And so there could be a lot of anxiety there. But I've grown. I took to baking early on because there was not a lot of pressure, and now I feel with cooking, you have to have it at a certain time and so on and so forth. And if it isn't, there's no one else fixing it, and they don't get to eat, and that's their main meal. So I get to work on myself and how present I am and what is my feelings and my mood. And it's really gotten a lot better. Now, so there's no place for fantasy in cooking because fantasy is an unreal world. When you live in fantasy, God can't get in touch with you because your fantasy is a non existent person. It's you made up by you. And so you're as far away from God as you can get when you're in fantasy. And in fantasy in the kitchen, I'm elsewhere. I can't be elsewhere. I have to be there. I have to be really sort of focused, and saying, well, what do I need to get started? And then what do I need next? And do I have what I need? And no, I don't have what I need. It's not here. Well, do I have what I have what I have, but do I have it ready to be used? If you need to chop things, then get the things that need to be chopped. Get the chopper, and so on. Um, I can imagine things looking a certain way, but I've got to do the work. I can't escape. When I'm going to be the cook, there's no real escape, and so fantasy doesn't really help. Can't be elsewhere. And I've learned that in cooking, I'm the main ingredient. Just think of that. You're the main ingredient when you cook because you're the cook. The food's not going to cook itself. It's not going to peel itself. It's not going to flavor itself. So you are the main ingredient. So I want to bring the best me to cooking. And the best me is going to come from a spiritual path that I'm working on, which in my case would be with a deep meditation. So as Ram Dass says, be the best me I can be, and be here in the kitchen, and be here now. So I try to do the same with my prayer. I'm going to show up the best that I can be. I'm going to be here at this moment and try and stay in the moment. How it all works out, I don't know. But if I can do that, it generally works out pretty darn good. So the most important thing we say is in prayers perseverance, but you got to show up to persevere. So cooking is practicing showing up. We sing in choir here. That's part of our communal lifestyle here. Is we tend to eat some meals together and we sing in choir together. Those are our group get-togethers, for instance. But they're no get-togethers if you don't show up. So I have to show up. That's the first thing you do in cooking, to show up. And then who's the you that's showing up? So I could be physically in the kitchen and I can be a million miles away and I can be in a terrible mood. And cooking's not going to be very much fun. And then what about boredom? What if you say, I'm bored? Uh, that's just a feeling. You don't have to go with your feelings. It's just a feeling. You don't have to let your feelings control your life. You learn that in the contemplative practice because how do you learn that? Well, you're sitting there in prayer and you have a feeling. This isn't going very well. This is, I don't feel very good at all. And then later in the day, some sort of insight comes or some sort of event, you really react quite well to it, or maybe quite differently than you used to react in a better sense. Oh, I wonder where that came from. My prayer this morning, well, my feeling wasn't very good. Well, God was at work. You just didn't know it. So don't evaluate anything by cooking, is how you feel about it. If you're bored, okay, you're bored. Uh, but I find that routines can be helpful. Ruts are not helpful. And so I'll end with this. Benedict's rule is open to the new. It's not to get into a rut. And your prayer is not a rut. Relationships are not a rut, and prayer is a relationship with God. It's dynamic. It's not supposed to be the same every time. You just show up. You're the main ingredient, if you will, in your prayer. If you don't show up, what can God do? And show up, be present, be here now, and just do your practice. The results are up to God. So do the best you can in your cooking, the routines that you do. Just try not to get into a rut where it has to be the same every time. Oh, well, you can. It could be the same every time. That's all right too, I suppose. But I tend to say, let's see how this could go. Sometimes it's the same every time. Yeah, that's safe, and it's okay. It's okay, but don't make prayer like cooking, where you can make it the same. Because in cooking, you're the only cook. In prayer, you're not alone. So try to keep that in mind. So I thank you all for coming. And now on the first Saturday of October, we are going to be doing more on Quaker and contemplative life. It's very interesting. And that's the first Saturday, and that's at 8:30 Mountain Time. I'll be in my jammies. And then the second Saturday of October, I think it's the, what is it, 9? It's Saturday, October 9, I believe. At 9 o'clock Mountain Time, I think we're going to continue on contemplation and cooking because I think it gives me such a wonderful chance to talk about the contemplative life through the kitchen. Now, I know a lot of people are just looking at it and say, I don't cook, so they're not getting it. But I think it's the springboard. Talking about cooking in kitchens is a springboard to talking about the contemplative life. And I hope I've talked enough about that to be helpful to you. So thank you all for coming. And hopefully we'll see you a couple of times in October. Take care. And we'll advertise as well. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.